The squirrel in your yard has lost someone. You did not know that? You could not have known. She looks the same as she always has, the same fur, same fence post, same morning routine. She still comes to the kitchen door at the same hour. She still takes the seed the same way she always has. But something is different. If you have been watching her long enough, really watching the way she watches you, you may have felt it without being able to name it. A slight change in where she goes, a pause at a certain spot near the oak tree that did not used to be there, a stillness that is different from her ordinary stillness. She has lost another squirrel, one she knew, one she had built her days around. And what she does in the weeks that follow that loss is something that researchers are only now beginning to understand, and something that most of the people who watch her every morning have never once been told. She is grieving not the way you grieve, but in the small ways available to her, and those ways are more recognizable than you would ever expect. Welcome back to Hidden Backyard Wildlife, the channel where we sit with the small wild lives that share our yards and try to understand what they understand about the world. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe before this video is over, because what you are about to learn is going to permanently change the way you look at the squirrel at the edge of your yard. Today we are walking through 8 things squirrels do when they lose someone from their social world, what those behaviors reveal about how their minds and hearts work, and why the small wild creature you have written off as background to your life may be carrying something right now that you have never thought to look for. Stay with me from beginning to end, because behavior number 6 is the one that researchers did not believe until they documented it themselves. And the final one, number 8, is the one I think will stay with you the longest, especially if you have ever lost someone yourself and found the world kept moving anyway. The first thing the squirrel in your yard does when she loses someone is go back. Not forward, back. Back to the specific spots in your yard where she and the other squirrel used to be together. The base of the oak where they foraged side by side on autumn mornings. The fence post where they sat in the late afternoon light. The corner of the garden bed where they used to chase each other in the way that was play and not threat. Researchers studying spatial memory in small mammals have found that squirrels encode locations not just as geographic points but as social memories, places that carry the presence of specific individuals they have known. When that individual is gone, the squirrel returns to those locations repeatedly, sometimes for weeks, sometimes longer. She is not looking for food at those spots, she already knows where the food is. She is looking for something she cannot find anymore. If you have ever noticed your squirrel pausing at a particular corner of the yard, standing still in a way that does not look like foraging and does not look like alarm, you may have been watching this. A small wild animal standing in a place that used to mean something and trying to understand why it feels different now. You may not have known what you were seeing, she knew exactly where she was standing. Squirrels are creatures of deep habit. The routes they take through a yard, the sequences in which they visit feeding sites, the paths they use between trees, these become grooved into their daily life over months and seasons. You can almost set your watch by them. But when a squirrel loses a companion she regularly foraged with, those routes change. Researchers documenting social behavior in urban squirrel populations have observed that the loss of a companion animal causes measurable disruption in foraging patterns, not because the routes themselves are dangerous, but because those routes were built around another presence. The path that made sense when there were 2 of them no longer makes the same sense when there is one. She does not avoid those routes forever, but in the weeks after a loss she approaches them differently, more slowly, with more pausing. Sometimes she starts down a familiar path and stops, stands in the middle of it, and turns back. If you have ever watched your squirrel behave in a way that seemed hesitant or uncertain in a place she normally moves through with confidence, this may be why. The geography of her yard is also the geography of her relationships, and when a relationship ends, the map has to be redrawn. She has redrawn it quietly every morning without anyone asking her to. When a squirrel loses a companion, she loses something else at the same time, a second pair of eyes. Squirrels that forage together share the work of watching. One eats while the other scans. They take turns. They cover more ground with their collective attention than either one could alone. The presence of another familiar squirrel is not just company, it is safety. It is half the vigilance outsourced to a trusted other. When that other is gone, the squirrel in your yard has to watch for everything herself. Researchers studying predator vigilance in small mammals have found that squirrels who have recently lost a companion show measurably elevated alertness, more frequent head raising while foraging, shorter feeding bouts, more time spent scanning from elevated positions. The body responds to the loss of a social partner by redistributing the work that partner used to share. She is not more nervous because the world became more dangerous. The world is exactly as dangerous as it was last week. She is more nervous because she is doing it alone now. Sit with that for a moment. The exhaustion of vigilance without a partner, the particular tiredness of watching for everything by yourself. If that sounds familiar to you, if that sounds like something you have felt in your own life after your own losses, then you already understand something about the squirrel on your fence post that most people never will. This is the one that is the hardest to watch once you know what you are looking at. In the days immediately following the loss of a companion, squirrels exhibit a behavior that researchers have termed active searching, moving through the territory in patterns that are distinct from foraging, distinct from play, distinct from any other known behavioral category. They cover more ground than usual. They revisit locations repeatedly. They move with a kind of purposeful uncertainty that looks, to human eyes, like looking for something. Because that is what it is. The squirrel does not have the cognitive framework to understand death the way we do. She does not know the word for gone or the concept of forever. What she knows is that a presence that was part of her world is no longer where it is supposed to be. And the response written into her biology is to go and find it. If you have ever watched your squirrel moving through the yard in a way that seemed almost frantic, not alarmed, not playing, but searching, covering ground in a way that had no obvious purpose, you were watching this. An animal doing the only thing available to her when something important has disappeared. She does not find what she is looking for, she never does. But she looks the way anyone looks when they cannot yet accept that something is gone. She looks the way we all look in our own ways in the days when loss is still new and the world has not yet adjusted to the shape of the absence. You would notice this if you were watching closely, and the squirrel in your yard is hopping in the small ways available to her that someone is. In the period following the loss of a companion, squirrels show a documented reduction in food intake, not because food is scarce, not because the routes to food have changed significantly, but because the biology of social loss suppresses appetite across mammalian species in ways that are ancient and consistent and not fully understood. Researchers studying stress responses in small mammals have found that the neurochemical changes associated with social loss, elevated cortisol, disrupted dopamine signaling, affect appetite regulation in squirrels in ways that parallel what happens in grieving humans. The body, across species, responds to the loss of a known companion by pulling back from the ordinary pleasures of daily life. If you have been filling the feeder and noticing that it stays full longer than usual, if you have been scattering seed and watching the squirrel take less than she normally does, if you have watched her sit near the food without eating, just sitting, just being near it without the energy or the appetite to engage with it, you were not imagining it. You were watching an animal who has lost her appetite for the ordinary world because something important has been taken out of it. You may not have known that was what you were seeing, but she was there every morning anyway, showing up, taking a little, sitting in the yard she shared with someone she no longer has. She was there and you were watching, and that is more than she had from anyone else. This is the one researchers did not believe until they documented it themselves. For a long time, the scientific consensus was that squirrels recognized companions categorically, as members of the same species, as familiar versus unfamiliar animals, as kin versus non-kin. The assumption was that individual recognition of specific companions was beyond the cognitive reach of a brain that small. That assumption was wrong. Studies examining social cognition in gray squirrels have now established that squirrels are capable of individual recognition of specific companions, encoding not just the category of familiar squirrel but the particular identity of a specific animal they have known over time. The specific scent signature, the specific vocalizations, the specific movement patterns of one individual distinct from all others. What this means is that when the squirrel in your yard loses a companion, she does not lose a generic familiar presence. She loses a specific individual, one she knew, one whose particular smell and sound and movement she had memorized over months or years of shared daily life. The grief, if we can call it that, and the research is beginning to suggest we can, is not abstract. It is pointed. It is aimed at one specific absence in a world that otherwise continues unchanged. She knows who is missing. She knows it is not just any squirrel that is gone. She knows it is that one, the specific one, the one she knew the way you know the people you have built your life around. That is not a story about squirrels. That is a story about what it means to know someone and lose them, and it has been happening in your yard quietly every time. Life does not stop for the squirrel in your yard. The seasons do not pause. The need to forage, to cache, to watch for predators, to maintain the nest, none of that stops because she is carrying something heavy. And so she does what must be done. She rebuilds. Researchers observing squirrel behavior after companion loss have documented a gradual process of behavioral reorganization in the weeks and months that follow. New routes established, new foraging partners sometimes sought, new rhythms built around an altered social landscape. The squirrel does not wallow. She cannot afford to. But the rebuilding takes time, and during that time, if you watch carefully, you can see the effort of it. The slight extra pause before she starts the morning routine. The new path she takes that avoids the old one for a while longer. The way she sometimes stops in the middle of the yard and stands still for a moment that is too long to be practical. She is carrying the weight of reorganization. The quiet, exhausting work of building a new normal around a space that used to be filled. You may have done this yourself. You may know exactly what that work feels like, the way you reroute around the absence, the way you rebuild the shape of your days around something that is no longer there to give them their familiar structure. You may know the particular tiredness of that process. She knows it too, in the small ways available to her. She knows it too. I have saved this one for last, because it is the one I think will stay with you the longest. The most extraordinary thing about squirrel memory, the thing that research has only recently begun to document, is not how long they remember their own losses. It is how long they remember yours. The squirrel in your yard has been watching your household. She has learned who lives there. She has encoded the faces, the voices, the routines, the rhythms of the people who belong to your yard. She knows how many of you there are. She knows when the number changes. Researchers studying urban squirrel behavior have observed that squirrels respond measurably to changes in human household composition, altered routines, changed patterns of presence, the disappearance of a familiar figure from a yard they have monitored for months or years. When someone you love stops appearing in this yard, when the household loses a member, when the person who used to scatter the seed in the morning no longer comes to the door, when the yard grows quieter in the particular way that yards grow quiet after a loss, the squirrel notices. She does not understand what has happened. She does not have the language for death or grief or absence, but she has the memory, and the memory does not fade quickly. She will return to the spots where that person used to stand. She will wait at the times they used to come outside. She will sit near the door they used to use, and she will watch it with the patient attention of an animal who has not yet accepted that someone is not coming back. She cannot mourn the way you mourn, but she bears witness. In her own small way, in the only way available to her, she keeps showing up for the person who is no longer there to see her do it. The squirrel in your yard has outlasted losses you do not know about. She has watched households change and people disappear and yards go quiet, and she has kept coming back. She has kept returning to the places where the people she knew used to be. She will do the same for you long after you stop expecting it, long after anyone else has moved on. She will come back to your door. She will wait at your fence post. She will sit in the yard you shared with her, and she will watch for you in the way she has always watched for you, with the whole quiet attention of a small wild creature who decided, a long time ago, that you were worth remembering. That is not a story about squirrels. That is a story about loyalty, about memory, about what it means to be known by something that asks nothing in return except to be near you. It has been happening in your yard every single day. And now you know. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the comments below. Have you ever watched the squirrel in your yard and felt in some quiet, unexplainable way that she was carrying something? A hesitation that did not belong to the ordinary morning. A pause at a certain spot that felt like more than foraging. A A stillness that felt somehow like it was about something you could not see. Tell me about it. Where were you? What did it look like? What did it feel like? The stories this hidden backyard wildlife community shares are some of the most extraordinary I read every week, and every single one of them matters. If anything in this video changed the way you think about the squirrel in your yard, if it changed the way you will look at her tomorrow morning when she appears at the kitchen door, share it with someone who would understand. Sometimes the right perspective at the right moment changes what we notice for the rest of our lives. Thank you for being here at Hidden Backyard Wildlife. The next time you see her sitting still in the yard, not eating, not running, just sitting, you will know something now that you did not know before. She is not just resting, she is remembering.